Thank you for listening to Rise Up with Julie Baumgartner. Today, I have asked Miss Leah to come back and discuss in her expertise as a licensed therapist, mental health, anger, and specifically conflict resolution. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me back. Yeah.
So let's begin with a definition of conflict resolution. And can it be achieved, and how would you recognize it when you have resolved a conflict successfully?
So I would first define conflict resolution is recognizing that there's an issue or something that needs to be solved and having differing opinions or differing perspectives that get in the way of solving that problem or something that needs to be achieved.
Is reconciliation the goal?
I would not say reconciliation is the goal yet. I feel like agreeing on a plan of action, coming from two different perspectives, and sometimes that does call for reconciliation after. But first, I feel like just being able to humble, let's say, how we feel and the ego that goes behind it sometimes, it can get in the way. So I feel like that would be something that we have to work on first.
Why do you think the need for conflict resolution has exploded in our society today? What has made it such a hot talking point?
So I think I'm laughing because I think of different rules that have been kind of unquestioned. So being polite has been a huge thing that is recommended and not to cause a rift. And so that means that we don't question people's motives. We don't question people's goals. And I feel like we went as a society for so long playing nice and making sure we keep the peace without truly questioning what is the perspective that one has, or maybe not perspective and perception, because everyone has differing opinions. And I feel like we never knew and we never thought to ask, or even if we have an inkling that maybe someone may not agree with you, it's that kind of underlying rule has kind of escalated up to a national, international level. And so when we don't question or we don't challenge in the correct way, we have polarized opinions and explosions, metaphorically speaking, and literally speaking. And I feel like that's one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with right now.
So primarily, is anger a result of unresolved conflict?
Yes. I feel like anger is a result, and I also feel like it is it's basically the head of something underlying that, unresolved. And it's the result of, how do I put this? Of being unable to communicate one's true feelings out of fear of disruption. So playing nice, I feel like. And whenever you don't validate yourself for so long, you do get angry over time, and that can build over years.
How does abuse and violence tie in to conflicts, or not knowing how to resolve the conflicts peacefully?
I think that there are so many types of abuse that aren't really, how do I put this? It's not really recognized or questioned. So whenever we think of abuse, we think of, a domestic violence, black eyes, and just the very obvious. But what we don't really pay attention to is the passive aggressive abuse that happens. So the snarky comments of maybe someone in your family or friends, and just knowing that they don't mean it this way or that way, that contributes to an overreaction or invalidating oneself for so long that eventually they explode or act out in a maladaptive way. So not questioning or invalidating or saying, oh, it's not that bad or it's not that big of a deal for so long could have some really long-term negative effects.
So give me some examples of how you would suggest it be handled if there was tension within a household or tension within a family.
I would first, it's so common, especially with a lot of my clients, that being able to engage in active listening, it's one of those terms that we're starting to kind of use in society without really questioning how well we're doing it. I feel like, project making sure that we feel validated, but it's really hard to use self-reflection. So starting out with self-reflection, and I think we've talked about before how just because we don't mean it a certain way does not mean that it's okay. It means that, okay, after someone says that it hurt for, your mom or dad to say something in a certain way, and they say, oh, I didn't mean that, that isn't the go ahead to continue that behavior. It means, okay, that's when a conflict resolution strategy can develop. So if you see that, for example, your kid or someone in your house takes things a certain way, collaborating and seeing and meeting in the middle, instead of calling them sensitive or, oh, you take things too hard, just being open to feedback and suggestions instead of relying on the hierarchy of whose feelings matter more. And just because it's a child does not mean that their feelings aren't less relevant, because that's how generational trauma starts.
A word I keep hearing brought up is validation. Mm-hmm. Why do we, in today's society, feel we have to be validated?
It comes from years of not being validated. And so then we kind of cross over into this hyper validation, seeking validation in everything, which can be harmful because not everyone's going to validate you. And adjusting and being able to validate yourself is something that has to be learned as well. So figuring out where you aren't getting that validation, is it necessary for your growth and your development? After you become an adult, not saying that it is not necessary to have validation, but the most critical ages and stages of needing validation happens when you're younger. So if you're given that when you're younger, you will be able to validate yourself. You will feel more, it directly links to your self-esteem. So if you grow up being criticized your entire life for being just a little bit different, you will have low self-esteem. You're more likely to have depression. And that impacts the quality of your life and the goals and your overall success.
Is validation, to clarify, is there ever a time when you might demand or want an unjust validation or completely unchallenged acceptance of an attitude or behavior? When do you demand that validation from someone?
When it's like the appropriate time,
Yeah.
Like what's that line? I feel like whenever you have a sense of entitlement to one's feedback, appropriate validation can usually be measured by the outcome or the reasoning behind it. So if you feel like you need validation just to get up and go to your job every day, that's when we cross over into pity. So whenever you are only motivated by validation, you almost kind of cross into this toxic situation where there's some imbalance going on. Maybe your needs weren't met at a certain point, and if you are starting to see negative outcomes all around you and self-awareness enough to see that, then that's when you are needing to maybe reassess what's going on.
I had this question wrote down about triggers.
Oof.
Should you know what they are? Should you yourself know what your triggers are? And then should you communicate that to others? But then does that make it their responsibility to not trigger you? And does it become an excuse for violence if you have communicated your triggers and they are ignored?
That is such a there's so many layers to that. And I think those are all important questions. So communicating your triggers to someone who is safe, someone who considers you and respects you, I think is very important. Because if you start communicating those things to everyone, people know how to target you. Being aware of your own triggers, I think, are important, and doing the work to identify how you will react or respond to people who trigger you. That is why I very much promote therapy or having a safe space. I feel like nowadays we have so much more access and there's so many resources for free therapy. So being able to be validated in a safe space and then figure out with a professional what are my triggers and what I can do when those triggers are something that you can't help. I mean, I have a lot of clients who they're in high school and they're teenagers or they're a little bit younger and they can't just up and drive away or prevent something being said from their parents because it sucks, but they're your parents regardless if they respect your boundaries and your triggers. And so what I try to do with my clients is to create an action plan. So, for example, I have a lot of clients going off to college right now, and they're visiting with these parents, and sometimes our values don't align with our parents' values, and so being ready for worst case scenario. So I will say, how will we self-regulate? How will we self-soothe? Because at that moment, we may not be getting that, and we need that. So we come up with, just a plan and things that we're going to tell ourselves whenever those situations happen. When our dads say something off cuff that's kind of, it hurts and it triggers you whether he knows it or not. And coming back to me later and talking about it, or creating a way to maybe create a playlist that makes them feel better in that moment, that speaks positivity to them, and just learning how to adapt, because that is the world we live in, where sadly not everyone respects you on the same level as they should. So being able to continue and focus on what the true outcome and goal is, because respect from people isn't necessarily as important, or it doesn't impact you as much as achieving your goal.
Should you be avoiding triggers, or should you be self-aware enough to be able to deal with it?
I hate the word. Well, I don't hate the word avoidance, but I think that avoidance turns into other things. So if you feel like there is going to be a train wreck in front of you or a car wreck, you avoid that. But when it comes to avoiding driving all together, that's when we have a problem. So I use that metaphor by meaning if you feel like you are capable of being safe on the other end, then it's just a stepping stone to becoming, reaching towards your goals. But if you feel like there is something that could be detrimental on the other side, I do suggest maybe creating an alternative plan instead of avoiding. So I feel like that's kind of confused, and avoidance is something that I know me and my dad were talking about. He likes to fix things. He likes to have things done or if he sees a problem, instead of talking about it, if he feels like he can help and do it, he'll do it. But we were talking about how that doesn't solve the overlying issue of, hey, if something is bothering you or something in the relationship can be fixed by the other person, you're almost handicapping that person by trying to keep the peace. So you're avoiding the opportunity for conflict resolution.
You mentioned boundaries, and even myself, I am a little bit conflicted because it is such a buzzword.
Yeah.
When do you set boundaries that are healthy for everyone, and when are your expectations of others accepting your boundaries unreasonable?
I feel like when we've reached a time of disrespect and just blatant disregard for another person, that is when we are crossing boundaries. Boundaries are not an excuse to entitlement. And whenever we don't have this education, we hear these buzzwords and assume what they mean without the proper education or valid resource, it becomes an excuse to do X, Y, and Z. So boundaries are truly something that we feel negatively impacts us. And we're becoming assertive in what our boundaries are. So I'm trying to think. So whenever you are being disrespected, that is a good time to say, hey, I feel disrespected by that. I'm setting a boundary there. If you are being corrected and you feel triggered or a boundary is crossed, that's not really what boundaries means. That means that you disagree and you have to self-regulate. And I feel like those are convoluted and confused with one another.
If you feel that someone has stepped over your boundary, when should you initiate a conversation with them to let them know that it hurt you, or that you have higher expectations with the relationship?
If you feel safe to do so. All these questions remind me of things that my teen clients always ask me about, because in reality, it sucks, but the grown-ups or the adults in your life are, I don't know, they have, what's the right word? They have, they're your parents. And we can't choose our parents sometimes. There's great qualities and bad qualities of all of us. But whenever you are more vulnerable to unfair judgment or unfair punishment or just an unfair outcome, that is when you self-regulate and have just a safe space or a person that you can talk to about it later. Because not everyone has not entitlement, but the privilege to discuss those boundaries, because a lot of our parents are imperfect and they don't really see or don't want to see, or even our bosses, they don't want to see their impact if it's negative.
We talked about how you might resolve a conflict resolution within your household or among relatives. Let's go into the parents now. Conflict
Okay.
resolution specifically between, let's say, a teenager, a young adult, and their parents. Maybe even a young adult that has just recently moved out of the house.
Yes, the adjustment. Yeah. This is a very hard time for, because there's roles that are slowly shifting from parents who are responsible for you and are there to pour into you and give you feedback to consider, and then transitioning to a friend role that parent plays and someone that doesn't necessarily have direct right to your outcome or what you decide, because at this point you're an adult and this is your time to grow and learn and make mistakes. And sometimes our parents want to prevent that, or they may project what they want onto you, and it's uncomfortable for everyone. So there are appropriate times to have those important conversations, but it's never when emotions are involved, heightened emotions. Never or respecting each other whenever we see that one is getting a little bit heightened, and being able to set fair fighting rules. That's something I saw a college a university in another state talked about and developed out of research. Setting boundaries and rules before the conflict happens. If you and your family are known to not agree on certain things, having maybe a safe word or with a partner, just coming up with an action plan ahead of time, if we know that emotions are bound to get in the way of a resolution at the end or coming to an agreement. I feel like that is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of growth. And if you have a parent or an adult that doesn't respect that, just figuring out an alternative. Maybe those topics are off the table. There are topics in our family that are off the table between me and my parents. And if we keep going, things escalate and the situation usually negatively impacts. So just being able to not only expect that from others, but also check oneself. And that means adults, because I feel like a lot of times parents will tell their kids to make sure that they're doing X, Y, and Z and not do X, A, B, C. And they're literally doing that right then. So it's almost like a hypocrisy moment happens. So
in a family environment, it may not be that is a safe environment, but just because of the time spent with one another, and you know each other very intimately in that household, how would conflict resolution look different from a family situation to, let's say, whether a coworker or even another student in high school or college?
Oh, man, I feel like you were listening to me and my dad's conversation. We were talking about that. So I feel like because families know you on an intimate level, they can cut you where it hurts. They can hit you where it hurts, and it's easy to go low. It's easy to go there when you are, and there's no universal. They're able to get away with saying certain things to you that you can't say to your boss or your coworker without losing your job. So being very careful of bringing up old things that have happened. So we're staying in the here and now. That's kind of my philosophy, and how I practice therapy is acknowledging the past when it's necessary. But if we are talking about a present problem, staying there and not bringing up something in the past, because we aren't the person in the past. We could have grown since then, and just making sure that we are respecting the person in front of us by not bringing up someone we're not anymore or have progressed past, and respecting that boundary is something that I feel like in families, if we want to continue staying close to our families and staying close to the children as parents. I hear a lot of times, oh, like my kids don't talk to me as much anymore. They've been distant. Sometimes there is a reasoning that has to do with them, and that's hard to acknowledge.
So if you are in a work environment, do you express the conflict to someone in authority over you, or go to human resources, or do you handle it, during office working hours? Do you ask someone to meet you for a meal afterwards? What is the best
I know,
plan?
like the secret society.
Yeah.
So that is something, as a young professional, I am always learning and seeking, because social cues don't come naturally to me sometimes. I operate off of an ethic and morale, and if a rule doesn't make sense, I question it or I forget it, and that is something that I work on. I am actively working on, because some systems I may not understand, or we may not understand, are there for a reason. So I will say I would rather seek guidance and wisdom from someone that is in a position I want to be in life, who exemplify strong values and ethical standards. And sometimes that may not be a coworker. A lot of time, I would encourage people to maybe, that can go very good or very bad. In a work setting, I think that maybe talking to someone outside of that specific environment that is a professional would be a lot more helpful for insight and feedback than going to a coworker and going to HR. I mean, I'm just thinking a lot of private practices don't have HR, and we kind of just seek counsel and feedback from maybe older therapists or older professionals that are in a position that we would like to be. But if you feel safe and you feel like you have a safe work environment where you can go to your boss, if you feel like that is someone that's more of a mentor to you, and that's someone who you kind of would love to be one day, then that's when it's appropriate.
What if your conflict is with your boss?
Man, that is such a common theme, I think. I think that's when we have to reassess ourselves and our role in that conflict, and then assess what we would like our outcome to be. So if we would like respect and we feel like we're not getting it on a certain level and it's within reason, and you seek consultation or feedback from outside sources to kind of give you that unbiased opinion, because we are biased to ourselves, then that's when we may need to look for another place to work. And sometimes, I mean, that's a privilege as well. Sometimes we don't have that option. Then I would just kind of make sure I create a support system elsewhere.
You also mentioned social cues.
Yeah.
And this is like the second time in a week that I have heard of young adults not understanding social cues. And it led to conflict, but also a fight. So
Yeah.
what is...
Oh, yes, especially in the school system.
How can we be more aware of our surrounding and social cues and be more attentive to what others are...
Expectations, maybe. I think the difference between growing and learn, you just have to want to. I think that's why I have such good relationship with people in my where I work and with my supervisor, is because I'm very authentic and genuine, and it's more natural for certain people. And like I said, for me, it's something that I have to be the best therapist and the best, or be successful and the best professional I can be. I would like to learn. I'm always open to learning. I'm always open to feedback, because my ego is so small, because my brain just yearns for learning and improvement. So I always ask for very straightforward feedback on how I can be better. And I think that opens a door of those people that are over you wanting to help you, and understanding that if there is a misunderstanding, it's purely from a inability to, or just a place of not militia or maliciousness. It's a place of not being aware.
I think there's a great need for role models and also mentoring.
Oh, I was about to say that, mentors, yes.
And I know that many will not have that available to them, but you're literally either leaving high school or leaving college and going into a work environment.
Thrown into it, yeah.
And flung into it is the right word. I don't have a solution for that, but I think it's something employers need to be more aware of. And that often you're only as good as an employee as the information that you have received.
Yeah.
And too often I see conflicts because there has not been proper communication.
Yeah.
Or those in authority want to hoard that information because it gives them power.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And so there's just a huge potential for things to
I
go
know.
wrong when you enter
Yeah.
and get your first job, or give some help to people having that challenge at the time.
And we're so quick to, I feel like, judge. I always, hear older individuals say, "Oh, well, back in my day, X, Y, and Z," and that could either mean that they were they. I also see that sometimes that means that they were okay with being disrespected for so long, but they also mean that sometimes I feel like a younger generation, it's harder to explain, or them being open to feedback. And I'm a millennial, so I was born like right between, like, I'm almost Gen Z, which means I have seen and experienced hard work ethic, and I also experienced the internet just being created. But then I'm also a part of TikTok. I'm also always, on social media. And I think that there are select individuals who want to know more, who don't, just roll their eyes at feedback. And so I think that we need to humble a lot of times or understand that a lot of times people aren't coming from like bad place or bad intentions, that they're truly trying to help them. I hate that there aren't mentors just at the whim of others. I feel like I've been very privileged in my spot to have people that are in certain authority positions that have seen my curiosity and they pour into me. But sometimes mentors can be maybe 5 years older than us or a little bit older than us. And so that's why a lot of times people will say, I will help literally everyone before myself. But it's because I know there's so many people that have poured into me, and I just want to pay it forward. So if we could start that pay it forward system and being in healthy environments, I think that is like the grounds for a lot of potential actually meeting that potential.
I totally agree. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Is there a personality or a specific type of person that is more susceptible to anger issues?
Yes. I think of it as going as far back as possible. So if you come from an environment that is not as nurturing, an environment that is maybe passive aggressive or aggressive in general, unless you do the work to unlearn that, even if we know that that behavior isn't something we should do, if we don't learn more about ourselves and how to handle conflict or things the healthy way, we are going to, that's going to come out of us if we don't replace that behavior or learn a better way to handle things.
Are there symptoms and signs that manifest as anger issues that perhaps one may not recognize, like the silent treatment or
Stonewalling, yeah.
or cutting,
Yes. Oh my, yeah.
damaging property, those type of situations? What should a caring individual be on the lookout for if they suspect someone might have anger issues?
Yeah. I think whenever you notice withdrawal, I always hear people say, oh, like that kid was so quiet or that kid was so nice. Well, what is happening to that kid? Do you notice that individual is targeted a lot? Do you feel like that individual is alone? We are social beings, no matter how much we like to be alone, which weird enough, I love being alone, but I'm very social. To regulate our systems, because we're humans, we need community, whether that's one or two people, whether that's, I don't know, a pet, but we need some community in order to fulfill that emotional stability. So, yeah.
What if you have anger for yourself versus external anger outwards to others? What if your conflict is within yourself?
Yeah.
What if you don't like yourself?
Yes. I will say about 85% of my clients don't like theirself, to the point of maybe self-harm happens. We work on what is causing us to not like ourselves. And sometimes people say, oh, it's my nose. Oh, it's my, yes, those are results of a deeper meaning. Why do we not like ourselves? Are our parents very critical? Are our parents critical of themselves in front of you? Are you exposed to high self-criticism? Is there anyone in your life that's feeding into you positively? Are you around positive people? Do you have good friends? Do you have wishy-washy friends? It's all about our environment, and we don't just come out hating ourselves. There could be even a biological component. Social media, oh my goodness. If you don't have a squirrel brain like me, where you can't fixate long enough to start comparing yourself, and you do start comparing yourself, that's a whole nother ball field. So, yeah, I think there's a bunch of different factors.
What are the most harmful results of anger and the harmful results of not having a resolution?
I think we're seeing it in America more and more every day, specifically school settings. A lot of times I don't see a lot of people are saying, oh, like there's people their age bullying them. I've seen teachers targeting certain students just because their parent may not be available to defend them. Just there's so many, influences, or there's so many people that feed into other people's life or impact others, that if we were more intentional with our interactions with people, I do think a lot of things could be prevented. I mean, we hear all these backstories, not all the times, but a lot of the times where these certain individuals who commit these very harmful acts, they were loners and no one did anything about it. No one was intentional with them. Nobody, and as a therapist, you can almost predict the outcome of individuals whenever you start working with them long enough. You kind of you see if you're the only person in their life to kind of give them that positive feedback, but then they go back to toxic environments, we're playing 50-50. And it's sad. So yeah, there's a number of different things that can contribute to that.
So what do you do so a teacher might recognize it and they could report it. If you are a loner and you have no interaction per se with your family or with friends, who is going to alert a professional that this individual may need help? And then what responsibility also is it for yourself when you know that you're past the point of being mad and that you're entertaining
or not opposing,
or not opposing and being a conduit of violence and ending another's life. Walk us through any or all of that.
So I often talk about with my therapist noticing systems in place that we can't change, and you almost feel stuck. There's teachers that may report to admin, and admin is part of the problem, and it just kind of gets shoved underneath. And so then we're like, oh my gosh, why did Billy Bob, do XYZ? And it's because there wasn't a ethical system in place. And that my therapist often tells me, that is not that's life. No, but to focus on what we can change, what is within our power, and what impact can we make. So if we're noticing that this kid is, doing X, or, just really struggling with something, being intentional with our interactions with that individual. And that's all we really have true authority over. So the change, it sounds corny, but the change starts with us. And so that's why I know for me, ever since I lost a friend to suicide, and I had no idea, I often blamed myself because I thought I could do more. And I think that's very common for other people who lose someone in their life. But we are only in control of ourselves. When I look back at my interactions, they were always so pure and so genuine. And that drove me to be even more intentional with every person I meet, to the point where my husband hates going in public with me. He says I'm the golden retriever because I want to be a light to people. And if we all kind of have that mentality, I think that would be a lot more effective than just coming up with these blanket campaigns that do nothing in schools.
Is it more that the individual needs to take responsibility for their own mental health or their own actions, or sometimes you just hear, well, mind your own business?
Yeah.
So it's hard to know when to step in and when to make that judgment call where you are literally suggesting that someone might need counseling. So individual responsibility,
Yeah.
others' responsibility. Walk us through that.
Where's that? So we have so much access to information now where the worst they can say is no. That's my motto. Ask until someone says no. Being impactful without intruding kind of looks like checking in with them and just seeing how their day is. I had a client one day who also has a golden retriever mentality. They were just saying, hi, how are you? But then the next day felt like they needed to do more. And I had to remind them that even though we may perceive that that person is a loner and wants help, we can only do what's within our control, and that is to say hello. Now, whenever we do see those warning signs, which are all available, I mean, you can literally Google, how can you tell that a teen is depressed or being abused? And when you start seeing some of those things, it's better to be safe than sorry. There are so many times DHS or agencies receive reports that aren't as serious as one may perceive, maybe because of cultural differences and assumptions. But I think it's better safe than sorry.
Let's talk about revenge.
Oof. Mm-hmm. Revenge.
What do you do when you feel yourself compelled to
Oh, me, a female? Never.
when you
No,
feel
I'm just kidding.
compelled to seek revenge because you feel you have been wronged?
I have never seen revenge work unless it was in the gym. Creating a revenge body. But even ironically there, you are hopefully bettering yourself for yourself. I think that being worried about another's outcome in a negative way will never help you. And at the end of the day, the only person that can protect yourself on a very blunt level is yourself. So if not saying people wrong people to the point where there's some irreversible damage. And if you're at a point or in your life where you have a hold or have that you can just move forward and kind of learn, wow, okay, that person, the warning signs of that is not opening up to me and them always wanting to know stuff about me. And then they end up, using that against you. It's very natural to want to hurt them or in any type of way. But as long as we are worried about ourselves, I think, and making sure we progress, we never want to do something that could set us back. So not letting that take over, that revenge spirit. I mean, it's great in a song, talking about it and normalizing it, but it's never going to end in a way that we think it will.
Is anger ever a healthy emotion? And are there situations that would warrant anger? And how do you tell the difference between the two?
Anger is only okay when you're a boxer. No, I'm just kidding. I think there are ways to channel that anger into something that can impact us in a positive way or help us. So if we are playing a sport in high school, people didn't even know who I was when I played basketball when they walk in practice because I am always happy. But when I'm on the court, I would turn into this like mad woman or like just this, this force. And I think if we can find a healthy way to channel those feelings, because all feelings are valid. toxic positivity is not the answer. We have to figure out how to get rid of that. So finding a safe outlet is the only way we can acknowledge that anger in a healthy way.
What happens to someone who suppresses their anger? What is the outcome?
I'm trying to censor myself. A series of unfortunate events. One, we never know how much words and actions really impact another person. And whenever we see grandiose actions or things that hurt people on a higher level, or just that in general, that's when we know that anger was never channeled or addressed, or they're just at a spot where we can no longer help them.
If you are in like a rage or so consumed by anger, you may not have any rationale or ability to step back and look at the situation.
You black out.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is your suggestion to someone who often finds themselves knowing that they have somewhat lost control and they cannot see what is truly reality?
I think talking to someone that you trust, and sometimes people are like, well, I don't have anyone I can trust. If there is someone, if you're a part of a community, I would hope that there's one person that you notice has pure intentions, good intentions, and a listening ear. And that is often how I get some of my clients. There are some clients I have who people would never know they're struggling because they're so successful. But someone noticed or they reached out to someone, and then that's how we connected. I think that being willing to ask for help and literally Google it. Google what you can do if you feel helpless. There is a resource out there. We just have to have the desire and the motivation at the end of the day to fix it, or something to live for. And if we feel like we don't have something to live for, that's when we really need to just do the bare minimum of even calling 911 or any emergency system in place. But when I say that, I'm also thinking about that could also be a privilege because, even as a minority, that can turn out a negative way. That can go wrong very quickly. So seeking resources or people that we feel like are safe to connect us to that as well.
Do you feel all right in elaborating a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to share a story that I often use to kind of explain, even if you grow up in an affluential environment, the world can still suck just because of injustice. So I grew up, mom and dad. Dad was in the military for 20 years. He was just my role model, my idol, just pure good. And always worked in an environment where he was usually, the boss. And so I'll never forget, we were driving back from Six Flags and we were pulled over, and I saw these cops come out, and I was always taught, people are in positions to keep you safe. My parents never really taught me any different just because they didn't want me to be afraid, or they always protected me from the injustice. And so I saw these men come up to our window and in our van, and he said a lot of lies, like I wasn't wearing a seatbelt And naturally me, I'm like, yes, I was. I'm 6. I'm like, what? And my dad looked at me in fear, like, okay, like, let me talk to them. And so my dad starts talking to them. And then out of the blue, they ask him to get out of the car. And it was just me and my sister with him. We went on like a daddy-daughter trip. And they put him in the back of his car. And in the back of the police car. And I was so confused because I was like, what? And I saw my dad go from this very important person anywhere he went to almost becoming submissive. And I was confused because in my head, they're the same. They're equal. I think my dad may have been the same age. And so they started treating him so bad, talking to him so terribly, so disrespectful. And I will never forget the police just kind of bantering us, me and my little sister, and saying very rude things. Where's your mom? Just all these things that were unnecessary. And so after I guess they ran our tags, my dad gets back in the car and he says, so what you just saw may happen to you. This is what you do. And then that's when my dad gave me the talk, which is very common in the Black community, where you are taught how to handle a police or an authority figure that aren't treating you equally. And it shocked me. It's very common, and that's kind of how we see all these other events happen. But in spite of, I still have hope. I still feel like I am safe to a degree, but we have to be also mindful that not everyone has the same mindset. So,
if you were the age you are now and that happened, you would probably feel very angry and have some rage over a situation like that.
Oh yeah.
So how do you cope with that, knowing that it could happen? And some would say will happen
or has. Yeah.
How do you deal with that? How do you
adjust or just kind of process?
Yes.
I will say therapy or just having an outlet to kind of discuss and feel heard has helped me. Because there have been times, but I'll never forget my husband going through the same thing. And I mean, he was driving. I mean, he has a big old truck. I mean, it is very noticeable that he's very respectful, very militant, and it still shook him. And so he called me. And so even that action of calling someone and talking to someone, and anytime I feel like I'm about to be pulled over, I'll call someone that I feel safe to call and just to stay on the phone, just because you never know. You never know what's on anyone's mind in these days. But I create an action plan. I think that having a plan in place to stay calm, because regardless, we can only control ourselves. Even in that environment, I try to apply the same principles. And then process after, because if we don't process, that can just hurt us and it'll build up inside.
So talk to someone. Talk
to your vet, your doc, anyone. But don't bottle it. Do not hold it within.
How do you... Okay, you could take one avenue where you're going to talk about it and process it. Your other avenue may be you want to invoke change.
Absolutely. But in a safe way.
Yeah. So how do you, when you have that compulsion and you know it has been unjust and unfair, how do you avoid conflicts? And should you?
Yeah. So I tried. So I have actually been in that situation where I knew I was being pulled over and I was targeted. I was very respectful, but I made sure to ask it for a name and card. And I think that was enough. And I was given a ticket, but when I looked it up, wasn't given a ticket because he knew that I was respectful, but also aware of my rights. Now, that could also go like sideways. I think thinking through what's the best for you. So if you don't feel safe talking or asking those type of questions, just documenting description of this individual, maybe not directly addressing someone that could put you in harm's way, but taking protective measures for later. And that can produce change.
Has that made you put all law enforcement under that lens?
No.
Have you had good experiences?
I will say it helps being young and attractive. It's gotten me out of a lot. And not to be cocky, but I feel like being friendly has... I mean, I'm thinking about one time I was just being an oversharer and telling a police I was speeding because I had to get to a test. And then I ended up trying to have a conversation. He was like, well, look at the time. Like, don't you have to go? So just not assuming the worst has helped me a lot. And it doesn't, not everyone is the same. So the whole world is corrupt in some type of way in different systems. So I think not lumping everyone into one boat prevents stereotypes, prejudice, because there are times where I have had to call authority figures because it's either them or me trying to handle it myself. And that will not ever go well because I am tall, but I'm also not a trained fighter. So, I mean, just assessing your ability to impact change without hurting yourself. And then, like I said, not lumping everyone into the same bucket.
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I
really
would
am.
say it's fine, but I mean, it's not, but it's just the reality of this imperfect world. And yeah, just trying to do the best in my ability to affect change.
So let's talk about environments. What if you have grown up and that is all you have ever known? You were taught, perhaps...
Not to trust.
Well, perhaps you were taught, if you were a boy, that your masculinity was tied to being tough, knowing how to fight. And maybe, maybe girls are taught that too, to be able to protect themselves and to not be the underdog in any situation.
Yeah.
So if that is how you were brought up and it's really all you have known and you were told that these are good attributes of character that you should have, but then now you have developed anger issues, how do you get over that?
Yeah, and then I'm thinking and then conflict resolution. That results in you not ever knowing how to positively or... So I would say always examine who is teaching you, who are the people that are teaching you these attributes and these reactions or the ways. Are they in a place where you want to be in life? If not, I would take that advice with a grain of salt. I will never forget learning that in a book. You don't take wise counsel from people who are already in a place or a position that you want to be. If that individual who gave you that advice has been arrested 15 times, unjust or just, maybe not rolling your eyes at them, but maybe seeking someone who is in a successful role that you admire, that is in a place or position that has resulted in long-term success.
Okay, for someone who has had to live through actual threats, and now they perhaps perceive threats around every corner, everything may look like conflict to them.
very reactive or afraid or anxious. And I think whenever that happens, we have to seek help, seek outside feedback or unbiased opinion of if I am in a place, if you are always in fight or flight, your body is going to harbor that. So high blood pressure, if you're someone who has high blood pressure and you're always worried, you probably suffer from symptoms of general anxiety. And you have to take measures, maybe not take high blood pressure medicine, but maybe seek therapy. I'm always going to promote therapy because our body keeps the score of everything that we've gone through. If we don't process it, it will process itself through your body.
How do you learn to control your anger? And at what age should you possibly have mastered it?
I think emotional intelligence, and I'm starting to see it actually, should be something you teach at a very young age. If a child can understand what you're saying and commands and expectations, that's when we should start teaching emotional intelligence. I think that we are now starting to see that being taught, but it wasn't taught for people my age and older, and we're seeing the offset of that. It's very important to teach individuals to recognize their emotions and the reasoning behind happy, mad, sad. It may be that you're frustrated. You're frustrated with what, with whom, with what's going on. Always reflecting and being aware of self. And that starts the moment they start being able to just read the room, which is a lot younger than we think. So 1-2 years old.
How do you learn to resist temptation that would steer you towards anger or sadness or over reading the room, over exaggerating?
Yes. Overthinker, chronic overthinker here. I try to stay grounded, and I think of my overall arching goals in life, my purpose. And those are some things that we don't think about, and they're important to drive us. A lot of people say, well, I'm driven by money and success. Okay, why? What is it that we are trying to achieve with money and success? Having a why will help ground you in a lot of unfair situations. If I know that I am being treated unfairly, I will often go back to myself and be like, I can't control them. I can't. They may have had an experience that made them like this, but what I can control is my brain and remembering I want to do X, Y, and Z in the future. How can my behavior right now impact that? So always thinking about your goals and your end goals and maybe listing them and putting them somewhere to remind yourself. Because if we react to everything, we may not get to where we want to be in life. Being reactive is not effective long term.
You mentioned fight or flight for our listeners who have not heard that terms. Define that for us.
Yeah. So, and I feel like we just keep expanding. So fight, flight, freeze, they're all reactions to feeling like we are in danger. So in human nature, we are driven by different things, but whenever we feel threatened, adrenaline kicks in and our body wants to protect us. So I will say a lot of times in minority communities, fight, flight, or freeze are occur a lot more often or have historically. And so that has resulted in other negative results. But fight, flight, or freeze are ways to protect us. And when we, like our body wants to protect us, but when we often thrive off of that, it becomes unhealthy because our bodies should not be in those fearful states 90% of the time. That's when we start shaving years off of our life. We start, if we're always going, and not taking time to take care of ourselves, and that means our mental health, then we will start aging ourselves. We will start just not being the healthiest and the best that we can be.
What if you cannot turn it off? What if you have become so hyper aware that you are always in the flight or freeze stage?
Yeah, I often freeze or run myself. That's when you are in an unhealthy place. And sometimes we're so blinded and so used to that we don't think anything is wrong with that. But when we start seeing that happen and we start noticing other negative outcomes, that's when we need to take action. I think that we still have this stigma around mental health for self. Some of the best people in my life battle anxiety, and they promote and love what I do and encourage people to end the stigma on mental health without reflecting on taking care of themselves. We other ourselves so much. I other myself. I will tell my clients, make sure you get like 8 hours of sleep. And I may have slept 2 hours that day. So we have to make sure that we are living what we are saying, taking care of ourselves. Are we going to a therapist? Are we taking care of ourselves? We don't, just because we are taking care of our mental health does not mean that something is wrong with us. And ever since I have been on that journey myself, I've seen so many positive outcomes that led to other successes outside of mental health.
For some, conflict resolution may look like, well, you have just abandoned that relationship. Mm-hmm. You don't have
piecing
to see
out,
them.
leaving.
You're going to leave. For others, it may mean that you have to be friends. But what really, is it up to everyone what their conflict resolution looks like, or should there be an end goal?
There should always be a reason behind addressing something. So if you are in a relationship with a partner or anyone in a intimate setting or in a work setting, if you plan on being around this person and you respect this person and you feel that it's mutual, learning conflict resolution or coming up with a solution or end goal is what will drive and help us become a better person and a better communicator. And being a good person and being a good communicator are needed for success, or pure success, genuine success. So it is always something that we need to practice if we are wanting to progress with someone or grow around someone else.
Does that include coming to a mutual understanding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Respecting, because it's very easy to say, I want this, I need this, without examining what I am doing with other people or my interactions and my just my impact on others and what I can do to be better and respect them and their boundaries. So as long as we are able to accept feedback that can make us better, while also feeling safe enough to give that other one pure feedback without letting our emotions get involved once again, then that's something that can take you so far. Because anyone can be a tyrant. Anyone can bulldoze and get what they want. And and gain success through fear. But you are better off creating success that will be long-term and impact and reach others if you learn conflict resolution.
Does that essentially mean that you're going to agree to disagree?
Yes, it does. But I will put limitations on that because I've seen over the past past 5 years, just with everything going on in the world, that saying it's okay to disagree, we can agree to disagree, only goes as far and is relevant until someone's rights are being threatened. Whenever, because we can use that as a cop-out or a way to head out. If we are unable to empathize and understand that one's reality is being impacted by my ability to not understand and consider, that's when we have a problem. That's when we are using that fight or flight and deciding, okay, I hear you, bye.
Is it a misconception that people should walk around being happy all the time?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. I mean, I tell people all the time, the happiest people are the ones struggling. And we're taught to be happy and present our best self, especially, I think, in minority communities. You don't want to show that you're struggling because it may not work out in your best interest. And that has transformed into being people pleasers, being not acknowledging self as much. And it is better to be authentic and genuine in a respectful manner than to pretend to be okay and avoid hard topics.
So choose the hard topics.
Choose the hard topics. If you feel like there is an end goal or a way to impact people, then go for it. But if you are still arguing with your aunt on Thanksgiving, and you know that there is nothing that you can do to change her opinion, take it off the table. Because at the end of the day, if that relationship means a lot to you and y'all don't agree on certain things and she's not harming you or your family's not harming you, let's look at what we do agree on.
You might, not you, some might.
Maybe,
Not you, you're perfect. You're
maybe.
perfect.
Oh, yeah. Woo, yes, I wish.
But some might frame a situation in their mind that does not accurately represent reality. And they might base that from lived experiences or
Trauma.
And just what they have known. So what is your advice to someone who has a frame set in their mind and it has become detrimental to their success?
Oh, okay. So actually that is something that I did have to learn, just because of certain environments that I've developed in where I was invalidated or labeled sensitive or, gaslit without that individual knowing it. I realized that was impacting other environments where I was being nurtured, where there was a genuine relationship and caring for me. I think that's when we need to assess, am I the common denominator in all these stories where I feel like I'm being treated unfairly? And when I started doing that, where I saw my role as reactant or individuals, you're reacting, that could mean that there needs to be some assessing of self and how we can impact the change of having a better outcome. And ever since, because it's so easy to just say, well, it's not fair. But whenever we humble ourselves enough to want change and want to have a better outcome, we have to do the work on ourselves as well. So being humble enough to understand and realize that, wow, I am imperfect. I am being reactive. This person doesn't mean that. And just learning about yourself and what has impacted you in the past, that realization can make all the difference.
What does the path to healing from anger issues look like?
Well, if we are too busy, which if you're like me, you're doing 5 things all the time, I think learning and being open to learning it, in whatever form, whether it be listening to a podcast, reading a book that talks about the things that you struggle with, wanting to be better and to get better, I think that will be a start. I think that can start a change, and you may be alone on that journey, and that's okay. I've still seen success out of that.
What does emotional strength look like?
I think having flexibility and willing to, I think tenacity, I think that's the word for it, being okay with change, being okay with being vulnerable and potentially not having a positive outcome. I think that's emotional strength, and not, as people say, taking things personal, but then also being willing to change where change is needed.
Is emotional strength remaining calm at all costs? Or when do you allow yourself to, become a little bit vocal, perhaps,
Yeah.
a
Yes.
little bit reactionary?
Yeah. Having, like, protecting self and considering self. So we like to call it in the community emotional, or the psychology community, emotional intelligence. It starts with that. So learning about yourself and placing the same importance of others that you may have on yourself, because I see people that are depressed and anxious. A lot of times they have some experience not considering their self as much as they consider others. So whenever we start being more willing to put ourselves first and regulating our emotions and taking the steps to learn more about ourselves and our emotions, that's when emotional strength does develop.
What if someone is mad at you or dislikes you or even hates you? How do you handle that?
That is, oh my goodness, that happens so much in high school with my high school clients. I mean, they'll come in and they're direct and will say, I think you're upset with me. And they're like, no, I'm not. And you can almost read between the lines of a text message. If you feel like that person is not being truthful, or they are upset with you, being as genuine as you can, and just ask in maybe not in an attacking way or a reactive way, but examining what's in your control. What can you say that can allow them to feel like they can be very honest and open with us about something that we did that did hurt us? That is something that I had to learn. People would maybe talk around me instead of to me. And that may have been because they felt like I couldn't handle something. So that's when I had to do some self-reflection.
Do we have to be friends with everyone?
My mom has said that my entire life. And my parents, you don't have to be friends with everyone, Leah. Yes, you do not, because that is when you are more vulnerable to negative outcomes. Not everyone will have the genuine desire to help. And I have learned that the hard way. And that's reality. That's life. Not everyone has pure motives, and that's okay as long as you protect yourself.
Not everyone will like you.
Not ever. Oh my goodness. Yes. And when you realize that, it hurts. It's because it's like, oh my gosh, how can I fix it? But if their perspective and their opinion doesn't impact your success, it's okay.
Sometimes, perhaps, going into a new environment can in itself create conflicts. There, because it's unfamiliar. How would you suggest to someone that they alleviate that tension in their lives?
Hopefully, I mean, from my perspective, if there's an unfamiliarity, like I welcome change, but I've been a part of environments where that's not true. Being on the other end, if you are more open to learning about this foreign concept or this individual or this background, ask or even do the research or just put yourself in their shoes and consider everything that they may be stepping into. And I don't know, start a conversation. A lot of people are so scared to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. Once you get that, so that's something that social cues, a lack of, has helped me. I want to learn. I want to know more. And once you have that, you get past that fear, you never know. That person could be just like you. And if they're not, they could be a person that both of y'all can kind of feed off of each other.
Is anyone genetically predisposed to anger?
Yeah. Yes. I'm thinking about just generational trauma. Just because of our history, a lot of times, because there's so much injustice, whatever was felt or experienced of our great grandparents, there are outcomes. And we have found, there are things that are passed down emotionally. So, yes, definitely. If you come from a line of injustice or hurt or abuse, you are more likely to experience the offset of that even way down the line, especially if it starts back way, way, way before you were here.
Do you suggest exercises to become more self-aware?
Yes. So at the end of the day, reflecting on and asking yourself questions, it's called practicing mindfulness. So asking, what happened today? Was I happy today? Did I go the whole day? What is it that I did for myself? What is it that I did for others? Did I do more of one than the other? Do I have a habit of doing that on the grand scheme of things all the time? What is it that do I validate myself? Do I just these are all questions. If you look up mindfulness, at the end of the day, it can take 5 minutes. It can make you more in tune with yourself, which means you learn more about your emotions. That's something I try to challenge a lot of my clients to do. And it's something they don't always want to do, but it's necessary. If we're going to be on TikTok for an hour or social media for an hour or doom scroll, we can take care of ourselves for 5 minutes and do a check-in.
We're talking about conflict resolution, but the world around us does not so much look like peace. It does look like conflict.
Just check out. Just check out. Unplug. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Unplug.
Being aware of everything does not help. I remember the worst place I've been in mentally was also the same time I consumed news all the time. During COVID, during just the racial tension in the world, and being so aware, it can be addictive, but it can also be harmful. Ever since I have unplugged and prioritized the connections around me, I have been so much better. I mean, I've had people tell me, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? No, tell me. And if it's, I don't know, I've just been in a more healthy place.
So we all need to guard what penetrates our heart and our head.
Yeah. And if it's something, a certain thing that negatively impacts your mood, even though you like to look at it, look at the outcome. If you are experiencing negative or sadness or, depressive emotions, maybe not going to that thing as much, or I don't know. I just feel like for me, all I need is the weather and a traffic report. And if it's big enough, I will hear about it somewhere, whether that's at the gym, whether that's from my spouse, whether that's from a friend. And that has been great at filtering what goes into me.
Are you at liberty to, of course, not mention names, but discuss some of your most kind of heart-wrenching times that you've had with clients on this subject?
Oh, about what subject?
Conflict, resolution, and anger.
I think I'm racking my brain. So, of course, specifics I can't, but
Exactly.
Just topics, I think I would say whenever I hear a client validating emotional abuse that is being experienced and seeing that they don't equate their experience as valid when what they are experiencing is valid. And even whenever they do try to do something about it and the system has failed them, the people that are supposed to protect them fail them, or it hurts. And just knowing that whenever I know that something could have been prevented, or there were people that they trusted did not protect them, or they prioritized, a partner over their spawn. That's what really it hurts to hear, that they weren't protected. Of course, as therapists, we get a lot of people's issues all day. But whenever you see that there isn't anything that you can do, and even the tools that you give them are not enough, that's when it gets a little harder. But through supervision and talking to people that are in the field, I think off topic, whenever I hear about unprotected populations and just things that have happened to them, it really hurts because I know from a personal experience. I hate that the world isn't always good. And so just being reminded of that sometimes, and not being able to protect them. I mean, I'm thinking specifically when a client told me about the not feeling safe in an environment just because of all the gun violence, and getting up in the mornings after we hear about these happenings on the news, just watching them cry in my office, knowing that I feel the same way sometimes, that we are basically going on a battlefield. It hurts. It really does. I mean, there are times I cry after because I feel it.
Do you have a solution to gun violence?
We talk about this all the time.
You on the spot,
No. I will say I have perspective. I have perception. And I feel like the more that we put systems in place to examine an individual's mental state, because mental health literally impacts everything. It impacts someone's decision to carry out things, carry out violence, or it's the difference between violence and killing a deer outside. So I feel like if there were systems that truly intentionally did a background check, I mean, and I know we have those, but they are so easy to go around. I mean, I don't think that taking things away from people, that never goes well in any society. I mean, we can take a toy from a baby, and that can be pure torture in the middle of a grocery store. Mm-hmm. But the moment that we start putting in preventative solutions and assessments instead of reacting, because that's a reactive solution to just take everything away, that will not happen, that will not work. But when we start prioritizing and making it a, like, what's the word? You have to go through a process in order to obtain X. Mandatory. Yes. I don't know why that slipped my mind.
It's okay.
Mandatory assessments and background checks that are more than 2 minutes. That is when we will start preventing so much. I mean, we can't put more we see that putting more law enforcement does not help. Mm-hmm. It may do something, but it's not long term. It's not, I feel like if we work smarter, not harder, mm-hmm. we can do so much. I mean, yeah. So if we focus on the actual things that are impacting us on a grand scheme, instead of hyper fixating on things that aren't impacting us or hurting us, quite literally killing us, then we can start changing.
It's mental health.
Yes. Mental health is literally the root of everything. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Whew. Got me worked up. I'm down off my soapbox. I'm done.
It's okay. I asked.
Yeah.
I did. We've been discussing conflict resolution, but what do you deal with most commonly in your licensed therapy practice?
Ooh. I think that I deal with the most identity as far as who are we as a person? On the very surface level or at the root, who am I? And then anxiety and depression. And that is always connected to something deeper, and environment. I think that is something that I see the most.
Can you pinpoint why you're seeing it?
I think it's a domino effect. It's usually the cause of, like I said, generational trauma, a lack of resources or lack of understanding of why they are at doing this. It's usually because of something bigger than them. Self-blame is something that's one of the first things that I have to, validating what they feel is so mind-blowing and powerful to them. And I'm like, man, you've gone 30 years without being validated. No wonder you're depressed. No wonder you're anxious. No wonder, we have these disorders going on because of the community and the environment.
To go back to what this will be titled is conflict resolution.
Yeah.
I want to leave people, and then I'll give you opportunity for closing thoughts, but run through either 3 or 5 steps for conflict resolution, for working towards
a resolution. Yes. So to start that process, I would first take a step back and look at the situation that is impacting you or someone around your environment. Then I would look at the role before anything else, before talking to anybody. Look at the role that you play in this situation, whether it being a reaction, the way that you approach the situation, the way that you present yourself in the situation, self-reflect. Then I would seek an outside source or opinion, or I would seek resources that kind of talk about this, or I would see if there's a pattern. Yeah. So I would look for a pattern to see if this is something that happens often. If it does, I would look and seek counsel, whether that's a trained professional or someone that is in a place that you want to be in. Seek counsel and see what they would do and how they have approached it. Someone who is good at conflict resolution. Then I would talk to the individual if I feel like it's something that not just I can fix within changing my role or doing something in my role. I would collaborate with that person. And the most that they can say is no, but you tried. So do everything in your power.
Closing thoughts. You can say anything you want.
I would say, learn more about yourself. Learn more about yourself and focusing on what is in your control instead of what's out of your control will impact your mental health and your happiness in life. If we focus on the world being on fire, it's depressing. But if we focus on what's good in our life and what we can do to have a purpose in life and to impact change, whether that's just to us and our outcome or a bigger outcome, that will give you drive and motivation and a lot more happiness, hopefully.
It is a most sincere pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me
and to
back.
also just becoming your friend
Yes.
and getting to know you.
Yes.
I'm so thankful.
Yes.
It is a gratitude moment.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So
So
thank you.
glad. Yes, thank you. Thank you for putting up with me. Just kidding.